What's going on? Peace, 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 everybody. This your girl Tiffany coming through here live in effect. Live in effect. And today I'm going to be dealing with the subject about I'm going to be dealing with the subject about prohibiting the importation of slaves. So this was a law that was passed around 1807, but it didn't become effective until January the 1st of 1808. And the law basically stated that no slaves shall be imported into the United States from Africa. All right, that was the law. But then that law had failed. So what I want to do is first and foremost, I want to thank everybody that has supported this channel. Shout out to my new subscriber. For those of you who are new to my channel, you go ahead and share the videos, check out my other contents on there. And today, hopefully I can have a guest on here that can help me out here. So they can just share some information, some historical background about this. Yes, so hopefully the guest will come on here. But other than that, make sure you guys like and subscribe and share the channel. So let me before I get started, let me go ahead and see where my guest is, and then I'll go from there. All right. All right, so while I'm waiting on the individual, I'm just going to go ahead and start on this information. So the act prohibiting the importation of slaves, as I told you guys, was the act that came out. So I have some sources on that. And also I have some books that's related to the topic. Okay. So many people don't know that slavery was illegal at one point. The reason why people don't know that because slavery was happening all the way up to after the Reconstruction era. Slavery was taking place until the Reconstruction era. So that's why most people believe that it wasn't illegal. Most people thought that slavery was just a law throughout the whole entire time, and it was only a short period of time that it was a law. However, it became banned after 1807. It was banned. So that's what I'm here to talk about. So what I want to do is I want to go into some of the information here. Okay. So what I want to do, I want to share the first information. It can be found on archives.gov. If you go to this website right here, if you go to this website, archives.gov, and it says the slave trade, and it says at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, delegates fiercely debated the issue of slavery. They ultimately agreed that the United States would potentially seize importation of slaves in 1808. An act of Congress passed in 1800 made it illegal for Americans to engage in the slave trade between nations and gave U.S. authorities the right to seize slave ships which were caught transporting slaves and confiscate their cargo. Then the act prohibiting the importation of slaves took effect in 1808. However, a domestic or coastwise trade in slaves persists between ports within the United States, as demonstrated by slaves manifests and court records. So there was domestic slave trade happening as well. So there was domestic slave trade that was going. I mean that it was happening within the United States. Okay. So that's something I can get into about later in the next video. But yeah, that was happening. That was taking place. Now, let's go down to where it talk about the act prohibiting the importation of slaves, 1808. Right here. It says Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution state that Congress could not prohibit the importation of persons prior to 1808. 20 years later, the act to prohibit the importation of slaves in any port or place within the jurisdiction of the United States from and after the first day of January 1808 was passed. The 1808 Act imposed heavy penalties on international traders, but did not end slavery itself, nor the domestic sale of slaves. Not only did it drive trade underground, but ships caught illegally trading were often brought into the United States and its passengers sold into slavery. So yes, in the previous video that I did with Brother Ngozi, he mentioned that there were underground slavery going on. When slavery was illegal, there was people who was doing it underground, and they were bringing ships illegally here to what we call today as the United States. Yep. So now let's go on to the Wikipedia source. Let's look at how it came about, how this law came into existence. So we're going to look at the background of it. All right, so here's the background. With the introduction, I already talked about that, but go further down. It says this legislation was promoted by President Thomas Jefferson, who called for its enactment in his 1806 State of the Union address. He and others had promoted the idea since the 1770s. So the idea about it came about in the 1770s. All right. Thomas Jefferson, the president, the third president of the United States. I think, was he the third president? Yeah, I think he was. No, I think he was the second president of the United States. Yeah, the second president of the United States. And he himself had slaves of his own. He called to action to ban the importation of slaves here in America. He called to action on that. So, according to the wiki source. And it says that it reflected the force of the general trend towards abolishing the international slave trade. Remember, what did I say before? Slavery was international. It was not just a United States business. It was an international thing. And check this out. What do he mean by international? Let's look at it. Going back to what? The Atlantic slave trade. Okay. That was international. So people must remember that slavery was an international business as well as being domestic, but it was more so international. It was an international business. And it says, it reflected the force of general trend toward abolishing the international slave trade, which Virginia followed by all other states had prohibited or restricted since then. South Carolina, however, had reopened its trade. Congress first regulated against the trade in the Slave Trade Act of 1794. Again, Congress first regulated against the trade in Slave Trade Act of 1794. The 1794 Act ended the legality of American ships participating in the trade. The 1807 law did not change that. It made all importation from abroad, even on foreign ship, a federal crime. So let's look at this. Let's check this one out. So the Slave Trade Act of 1794. The Slave Trade Act of 1794 was a law passed by the United States Congress to prohibited American ships from engaging the international slave trade. It was signed into law by President George Washington on March 22nd of 1794. So George Washington signed a bill to say that American cannot be involved in the international slave trade. That was the first time, right? Then the next bill in 1807 said it's illegal altogether. It's illegal to import. It's illegal to bring ships over here to America. But in 1794, George Washington said, we going to sign a bill to make it illegal for those in United States to get involved in the international slave trade. Ain't that something? That's something interesting. All right. So it said that this was the first of several anti-slavery trade acts of Congress. In 1800, Congress strengthened it by sharply raising the fines and awarding informants the entire value of any ship seized, as well as additional prohibition on American investment and employment in the trade. And it goes on to say, federal outlawing of importation of slaves to the United States was enacted in 1807. Then it goes on to talk about domestic trade and owning of slaves became illegal in the entire United States within the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution in 1865. And this was after what? Reconstruction era. That was after the Reconstruction period, after the Civil War. That's when altogether it was abolished. No more domestic slave trade, no international slave trade, no type of trade, period. Okay. So then it goes on to say that the bill was introduced during the third Congress that happened December the 2nd of 1793. This bill was then passed March the 22nd of 1794 with the title Act to Prohibiting the Carrying on the Slave Trade from the United States to any foreign place or country. All right, so it goes in to talk about text of the law. And I got it highlighted. It says, be enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that no citizen of the United States or foreigner of any other person coming into or residing within the same shall for himself or any other person whatsoever, either as master, factor of owner, built, fit, equip, load, or otherwise prepare any ship or vessel within any port or place of said United States, nor shall cause any ship or vessel to sail from any port or place within the same, for the purpose of carrying on any trade or traffic in slaves to any foreign country, or for the purpose of procuring from any foreign kingdom, place, or country the inhabitants of such kingdom, place, or country to be transported to any foreign country, port, or place whatever to be sold or disposed of as slaves. And if any ship or vessel shall be so fitted out as for say for the said purpose, or shall be caused to sail so as for say, every ship or vessel, her tackle, furniture, apparel, and other appurtenance appurtenance shall be forfeited to the United States and shall be liable to be seized, prosecuted and condemned in any of the circuits courts or district court for the district where said ship or vessel may be found and seized. All right. And seeing that was the law. And it says after the modification by the slave trade at the 1800, Section 2 allowed for forfeiture by owners and possibility of a $2,000 fine. Section 3 affected foreign merchants. Section 4 forfeited any slaves on board the ship and fine of $200 per slave. In short, the act limited the international slave trade to foreign ships, and foreign ships using United States ports had to agree not to export from U.S. ports. But did this bill last any longer? No. Did it help? No. Because people were still doing what they wanted to do. Okay. All right. So just give me one moment. Let me see. All right. So, anyways, getting back, it says down here, first persecution, right? In August of 1795, Providence, Rhode Island merchant John Brown conspired to export. And the word export means to send out. Import means to bring in. Export means to go out. Import means to bring in. Okay. So, Providence, Rhode Island merchant John Brown conspired to export slaves. Brown conspired with a Captain Peleg Wood with the ship Hope to be used in the slave trade. By November, Hope was engaged in the slave trade, and in March of 1796, the owners of the ship were fined by Rhode Island the amount of £200. Because remember, they didn't use dollars at that time, for trading in slaves, which had been outlawed in that state. On a voyage in 1796, Brown's ship traveled to Africa and returned to Havana, Cuba with 229 slaves on board. This trading voyage led to a trial of Brown in 1796 for violating the statute. Brown became the first American tried in federal court under the Slave Trade Act of 1794. He was acquitted. However, Brown had previously been forced to forfeit his ship. He did not get it back after his acquittal. So basically, John Brown, who was a slave owner, was charged with a fine for exporting slaves. And then when they found out that he sent the slaves over there to Cuba, after it was outlawed for any person in the United States to be involved in the international slave trade, he was in trouble. They seized his ship and he never got it back. All right, so let's go back to the original information. All right, but here it is. And it says what? The domestic slave trade within the United States was not affected by the 1807 law. Indeed, with the legal supply of imported slaves terminated, the domestic trade increased in importance. In addition, some smuggling of slaves persisted. Now, here's the background of it. So the act affected only the import or export of slaves and did not affect the internal trade in states or between states. During the American Revolution, all 13 colonies prohibited their involvements in the international trade. Some also abolished slavery internally. But 3 states later enacted legislation legalizing the international again. So Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution protected a state's involvement in the Atlantic slave trade for 20 years from federal prohibition. Article 5 said this cause could not be affected by constitutional amendment. Only starting January the 1st of 1808 could there be a federal law to abolish the international slave trade in all states. So it started off as a state law, then it became federal law. But some states were still allowing it, even though it was a federal law. Some states still allowed it. And again, some people was doing what? They was bending the rules. And they was doing what they wanted to do. Because at the end of the day, slavery is what was making the profit. And you know, the main reason why they abolished slavery was not because, it was really not because of the fact that they felt sorry for the people and they feel that the people should be free. It's because the Industrial Revolution came on the rise. So the industry, right? And that's one of the reasons why they started having warehouses. Okay. So when the Industrial Revolution came into existence and came on the rise, they felt like, well, we really don't need slaves anymore because we're transitioning over into more technological advance. It wasn't about morality. It wasn't about people's rights. It wasn't about freedom. It was more so about the transitional stage they was going through. They was going through the process when they was being introduced to the Industrial Revolution, right? To the industrialized way of making profit. Slaves were no longer needed. It was no longer needed. Slavery was no longer needed. But there were some states saying, hey, we're not going to let this go because this is how we making our money. This is how we getting paid. This is what building our economy. So slavery was building these states' economy. They was building up the wealth of each of these states. So they weren't trying to let it go. They was trying to keep it going because they did not want to lose profit. They did not want to lose profit. Now, the North, right, was one of the first to abolish slavery before the South. The North was the first to abolish slavery before the South. That's big facts. Well, you know, you can check that out for yourself. But yeah, the North was like, look, we don't need it anymore. The South wasn't ready to let go. And at that time, there was 2 types of America. All right. And then there were territories, right? And unclaimed territories. But there was two kind of Americas. You had the United States of America, which was the northern part, and you had the Confederate States of America. But before that, you had the 13 colonies, because that's all they were, colonies. Everything else was territories or unclaimed territories, or it was being purchased. But everything else were colonies. New York was a colony. I think, was it? Yeah, New York was a colony. Philadelphia, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. Mm-hmm. Those were the 13 colonies. All right, so let's look at let's look down where it says the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit, shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation not exceeding $10 for each person. Okay. All right, so and there's the original documentation on that, but let's go further down. So it says by 1775, Africans, both free and enslaved, made up 20% of the population in the 13 colonies. Now, what was the 13 colonies? Let's look at that. The 13 colonies were what? They were known as the 13 British colonies. All right. So let's break it down. United States, or what we call United States, North America, is supposed to be the new Europe. The United States, what we call North America, is supposed to be the new Europe. Think about it. Louisiana is supposed to be the new France. New York is supposed to be the new Netherlands. And Massachusetts, Vermont, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Maine, those are supposed to be the new England. And Florida is supposed to be the new Spain. Right? And then, of course, you got New Mexico and all of that. That was conquered by the United States, but that's supposed to be the new Europe. So United States is supposed to be the new Europe, because it was first the British had control. Then you had the Dutch coming in. Then you had the French. Then you had the Spanish. So these are four different countries. The Dutch, which came from the Netherlands. The Spanish, which came from Spain. The French, which they came from France. And the British, which they came from Britain, which is now known as the UK/England. Whereas South America was supposed to be the new Portugal. The countries in South America, such as Brazil, supposed to be the new Portugal. But let's look at the 13 colonies real fast. All right, so 13 colonies, also known as the 13 British colonies, right? The 13 American colonies, okay? And it says, were a group of British colonies on the Atlantic coast of North America. Founded in the 17th, 18th century, they began fighting the American Revolutionary War in April of 1775 and formed the United States of America by declaring full independence in July of 1776. Okay? Now check this out. Look at this map. Hold on. Let me show y'all this map. What did I say? This is supposed to be the New Spain, right? Province of Quebec. Because remember, the French took over. All right. So this was considered. Well, you know what? The Spanish took over Louisiana first. Then the French had took over because the French had bought up the area and they call it the Louisiana Purchase. Okay. And these are the colonies: Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Right? Everything else was Indian Reserve. And then you had East Florida, West Florida. Okay? This little part right here was considered West Florida. Now it's Alabama and Mississippi. Okay? And parts of Louisiana. But this was West Florida. And this was East Florida right here. Mm-hmm. All right. So let's go ahead and let's walk through it. So again, what did I say? New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, right? That was New England. The middle is New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. The South is Maryland. Yes, Maryland is in the South for those of you that don't know. All right. So the folks in Maryland, they don't like consider themselves to be the South. All right. But they are in the South. They are what they call the Mason-Dixie line. They on the Mason-Dixie line or in the upper part of the South. But Maryland is in the South. Yes. Okay. All right. So it's Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. All right. So it says the 13 colonies came to have a very similar political, constitutional, and legal system, dominated by Protestant English speakers. The first of these colonies was Virginia colony in 1607, a southern colony, right? While all these colonies needed to become economically viable, the founding of the New England colonies, as well as the colonies of Maryland and Pennsylvania, was substantially motivated by their founders, concern related to the practice of religion. The other colonies were founded for business and economic expansion. The middle colonies were established on an earlier Dutch economy, or an earlier Dutch colony, New Netherlands. And New Netherlands is what? New York and New Jersey area. All the 13 colonies were part of Britain's possession in the New World, which also included territory in Canada, Florida, and the Caribbean. Okay? All right, so, and it goes on to say the colonial population grew from 2,000 to 2.4 million between 1625 and 1775, displacing Native Americans. This population included people subject to a system of slavery, which was legal in all of the colonies prior to the American Revolutionary War. In the 18th century, the British government operated its colonies under a policy of mercantilism, in which the central government administered its possession for the economic benefit of the mother country. So that was the reason why Britain occupied this land, because it was bringing wealth to their country. And what you know as United States at that time, that was colonies, they wanted to be what? They wanted to be independent. They wanted to be independent. They wanted to free themselves from the British. They didn't want to keep paying taxes to them. They said, hey, we've been in this place long enough. Why not take control of our own land? Right? Well, let's go ahead. Let's continue. But going down here, it says by 1775, Africans, both free and enslaved, made up 20% of the population in the 13 colonies, which made them the second largest ethnic group after English Americans. In 1774, the influential revolutionary Fairfax Resolves called for an end to the wicked, cruel, and unnatural Atlantic slave trade. During the Revolutionary War, the United States colonies all pledged to ban their involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. Now, there were those who were in the religious group, such as the Quakers. They put up a fight against slavery. They said slavery needs to be done away. It don't need to exist anymore. So the Quakers, who was pretty heavy in the abolitionist movement, they put up a fight against slavery. Where all the others wanted to keep it going. So if you notice that when a lot of black people during that time period, when they got the help from white folks, it was mainly those who were Quakers. It was mostly those who were Quakers that helped them out a lot because they were heavily involved in the abolitionist movement. All right. So when we go down to here, they say this was done for a variety of economic, political, and moral reasons depending on the colony. Let me read that again. This was done for a variety of economic, political, and moral reasons depending on the colony. So after the American victory in 1783, South Carolina reopened its involvement in the slave trade until prohibiting again in 1787, but then reopened it in 1804. While North Carolina allowed the trade beginning after the Treaty of Paris until abolishing its involvement in slave trading in 1794. And check this out. Georgia allowed the slave trade between 1783 until it closed its international trade in 1798. And by 1807, only South Carolina allowed the Atlantic slave trade. Wait a minute. By 1807, only South Carolina allowed the Atlantic slave trade. Only South Carolina. But let's continue on. All right, so let's go down just a little bit. So it says in 1798, at creating the Mississippi Territory, Congress allowed slaves to be transferred from the rest of the United States to Mississippi Territory and exempt the territory from the part of the 1787 Northwest Ordinance that abolished slavery in the Northwest Territory, modern day Midwest, after 1800. However, the same act also abolished the importation of slaves to Mississippi Territory from foreign nation. The penalty for illegally importing slaves from abroad to territory was a fine of $300. in the Slave Trade Act of 1800. Okay. So Congress outlawed U.S. citizen investment in the trade, and the employment of U.S. citizen on ship involved the trade. So what is the Mississippi Territory? All right, so the territory of Mississippi was an organized, incorporated territory of the United States, right? And it says that existed from April the 7th of 1798 until December 10th of 1817, when the western half of the territory was admitted to the Union as the state of Mississippi. The eastern half was redesigned as the Alabama Territory until it was admitted to the Union as the state of Alabama. Okay? And that was on December the 14th of 1819. Right? So therefore it says the United States and Spain dispute these lands east of Mississippi River until Spain relinquish its claim with the Treaty of Madrid, initially signed in 1795 by the two countries' representatives. The Mississippi Territory was organized in 1798 from these lands in an area extending from 31 north latitude to 32.28 north, or approximately the southern half of the present states of Alabama and Mississippi. Okay, so check this out. And it says, the state of Georgia maintained a claim over the entire area of the present states of Alabama and Mississippi until it surrendered its claim in 1802 following the Yazoo land scandal. In 1804, Congress extended the boundaries of the Mississippi Territory to include all of Georgia seasons. Okay? So the Mississippi Territory is what we know today as Mississippi and Alabama area. All right, so okay, here you go. There you go. All right, so I got somebody in here. I got my guest. He's here. So we're gonna go ahead and have a bill, and I'm gonna let him talk, and I'm gonna let him introduce himself. All right, my friend. Are you okay? Are you ready? So you got your tie on. I can't hear you. Unmute yourself. Uh-oh. What's going on? I can't hear you. Hold on. Okay. Can you hear me? What's going on? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, I don't hear you. I don't hear you. I think your volume is down. Hold on. Hold up. Let me see what's going on here. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, I still can't hear you. What's going on? For some reason, I can't hear you. I don't know. Let me see something. Let me see if I can try something. Let me see something. Hold on. All right. I don't know what's going on there. I couldn't hear him. Yeah, boy. Technical difficulties. It sucks. It sucks really bad. All right. So, okay. Hopefully I can get him back on here. All right. Hopefully I can get him back on here. All right. Anyways, but as I was saying before that what is known today as Alabama and Mississippi was the Mississippi Territory. Okay. All right. So, but let's go ahead and go further down. All right. So, right here, I know it's a lot of information to go into, but it says the passage of the act. So, on March the 3rd of 1805, Joseph Bradley Varnum submitted a Massachusetts proposition. Okay. Yeah, proposition to amend the Constitution and abolish the slave trade. This proposition was tabled until 1807. On December 2nd, 1806, in his annual message to Congress, widely reprinted in most newspapers, President Thomas Jefferson denounced the violation of human rights. He said, I congratulate you, fellow citizen, on the approach of the period at which you may impose your authority constitutionally to withdraw the citizen of the United States from all further participation in those violations of human rights, which have been so long continued on unoffending inhabitants of Africa, and which the morality, the reputation, and the best interests of our country have long been eager to prescribe. All right, so let's try this again. Let's see. Okay, hey there, how you doing? You got to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Okay, how
Yeah,
you doing?
I'm good. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right. So go ahead and introduce yourself. Just, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Oh, I am Kudjoe Atkins battle. Big up Virginia, first of all. Big up to the South, birthplace. Big up Virginia. Um, there I call myself an amateur historian. I've been studying history now for honestly about let me be completely honest, 38 years. I've been like very avid, very uh, interested in history. You know what I mean? I grew up in a pro-black household where, even though my mother was a Moor, because my real name is Melvin Whitfield Bay. Kudjoe Atkins Battle is what I am. A boy born on Monday from those two families. So that's what I am. That's really all I am. It's the only epithet I need. But I'm a humble guy. I am really into the history of our people here in the United States. I think we need to recognize that first and foremost. It's not about not because we are African. We are African. However, we need to acknowledge, our recent history. Like the way I look at history is I treat it like a crime scene. With a crime scene, you start where you are and you work your way back. So I started where I am and I worked my way back. And that's how I came to many of the ideas that I had. Like I wasn't taught in school that black people in Mississippi are from Virginia. No one ever told me that. No one ever told me that. But black people in Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana are primarily from Virginia and Maryland and the Carolinas, but more Virginia. Blacks from Georgia are from South Carolina and Georgia to a lesser extent, because slaves did come directly into the Savannah, but not in the number that they came into Charleston or the James River region in Virginia. Not necessarily Richmond, but definitely Virginia. But Richmond, Virginia, which is where I am right now, was actually the headquarters of the domestic slave trade, which took place roughly between, I would say, 1810. That's kind of being a little too generous. It's more like 1820 to 1860. So more than 1 million people were deported from what they call the Upper South to the new Gulf regions, right? To tag on to what you were talking about, when you talk about the Mississippi Delta region, the big deal about it, about getting it, was really you're putting the Spanish out of the way. That was a buffer zone between that was a zone they wanted to create a buffer zone between the newly acquired Louisiana Purchase and Spanish Florida. No one ever thought that they would get Spanish Florida. You know what I mean? So they were trying to create a buffer zone, and that's what you're talking. What you're explaining is how that happened, creating that buffer zone that became Alabama and Mississippi. And those two regions grew extremely rich during the cotton boom. Grew extremely rich, and the difference between places like Mississippi and Alabama, the difference between them and say South Carolina and North Carolina is a lot of these Mississippi farmers, the planters, they were new money. You know what I mean? They were new
Hmm.
money. They took chances going down there. You know, you had people like Jefferson Davis, who would become the president of the Confederacy. His family's actually from Virginia. He moved there. He moved to Tennessee. Moved from Tennessee to I think Mississippi with his brother, and struck it rich in cotton. You know what I'm saying? So even the white people that live in Mississippi are from Virginia and the Carolinas. I'm not trying to overemphasize Virginia as if it's more important than any other place. However, like I said, I start from where I am and work my way back.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's overemphasizing, but Virginia was one of the first colonies.
The
When
first colony.
yeah, when the slaves was brought over here to what we call today as America,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them was brought over to Virginia. So Jamestown, Virginia, at that. So yeah. With that being said, I mean, I don't think that it's overemphasized. I mean, that's just a historical fact because that was the port. Virginia was the port, South Carolina was the port, and Georgia was the port. So that's just the accurate history of it. I mean, and yeah,
North Carolina doesn't possess the shoreline. But I also want to say Maryland, which is another place that we often think is a northern place when actually Maryland was
it's the South.
is the South. And
Yeah,
not only that, they imported more slaves than anywhere besides Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina.
really?
South Carolina arguably imported more than
Right,
Virginia.
right. After
However,
slavery was considered as illegal.
right in 1800,
Yes.
the majority of black people lived in Virginia. The majority of black people in what is now the United States lived in Virginia. The majority, almost doubling any other state, even South Carolina, almost doubling South Carolina, but not quite. Almost. It was like about 400,000 blacks in Virginia and about 239,000 in South Carolina. And that's why those states fed the domestic slave trade. And we're not taught about the domestic slave trade often. We just think that we happen to speak similar. You know what I mean? Like, we don't just happen to have similar norms, syntax, pronunciations.
Mm-hmm.
That's not happenstance. We have that similarity because we come from the same place. And that
Right.
same place is in Africa. We're all from Africa, but again, we're a collection of people from Africa. But we
Right.
became somewhat of a people in Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and everything else, and Georgia. I mean, you can't take Georgia because, Georgia was actually started. What's the dude name again for W? I know y'all learned that in school. It begins with a W. And when they first initially founded Georgia, Georgia was founded. They say a penal colony, but it was more a place for yeoman farmers, and that itself was supposed to be a buffer zone between Spanish Florida and South Carolina. That's what it was set up for. And it was supposed to be a place that Europeans could go and not have to deal with the slave economy. They could go there and get their own farms, but money took over. Slavery was actually illegal in Georgia initially.
Right. Right. Yeah, it was yeah, and then yeah, it was illegal. And like I was mentioning on here, that it was also illegal in South Carolina for a little while. Then they reopened it back up. Then it
Oh, you
became
talking about the importation? Yeah, South Carolina
yeah,
stopped
yeah.
importing. Yeah, like after the Stoner Rebellion, they didn't import any more Angolans. But even later, you're right, they stopped the importation. They were like one of the first to stop the importation. But that was in lieu of what's the guy name? Uh, Vesey, Denmark Vesey. That was in lieu of all of the things going on with Denmark Vesey and a lot of other black rebellions going on. They didn't want any more Africans, because we kind of take for granted when we talk about our ancestors as far as being slaves, we ignore their agency in slavery. We ignore that they were human beings with likes and dislikes. They laughed, they cried. They were human. They weren't just some animal, like the way we kind of taught about it, because slaves were property. However, they were still people. They were
Oh yeah.
people. You know, they were human beings. So, and we descend directly from those people. So I think it's very important for us to recognize their humanity. You know what I'm saying? I forgot. I lost my train of thought.
Um. So, all right. So, deal with the topic about the importation of slaves, right?
Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
how it's prohibited. Let's talk about Virginia for a moment because like you said, you're right there in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you know as far as like Virginia history, as far as the illegal importation of slavery?
It would have been fairly minimal. The illegal importation of slavery would have been fairly. It would have been minimal in the grand scheme of things. He probably would have had more people, selling into Biloxi or somewhere in the Gulf region than into Virginia, because to be quite honest, that Mississippi and Alabama was still frontier land. That's how come we call the Midwest now.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a time when Ohio was the West. The east of the Mississippi, west of the Appalachian Mountains was the West. You know what I'm saying? So that's why we call it Midwest now. Because once you crossed over the Mississippi, you have more Western land. So it's called the Midwest. And it's kind of come off stupid to us now because we don't realize the history in that designation, why that name was given to that area. But yeah, as far as being illegal, man, Virginia probably would be minimal because Virginia was a lot more established than Mississippi and Alabama. But it probably happened. I've seen like one or two incidences of it, but not really. But what I will say is Virginia was one of the main proponents of ending the slave trade, especially after the cotton boom. A lot of states, Mississippi, even South Carolina, tried to start it again. They wanted to start it again after it was illegal, made illegal in 1807. They wanted to start it again, but Virginia rallied against that because it would mess up the money here. Because most of the trade, domestic trade, was coming through here, so importing other Africans would economy here. You see what I'm saying? Not destroy it, but would take money away from them. So they didn't want that at all.
Well, but the South wasn't ready to let go because the South was like, well, slavery was helping to build up the economy of the South. Because remember, this before there was a United States of America as we know today, because there was two Americas. You had the United States, which was the northern part, and the Confederate States of America. All right. So the Confederate States of America wasn't ready to let go of slavery. They was like, no, we're not ready to let go of that. Why? That's our money. That's our income. That's our revenue. Why let that go?
Exactly. It was a slave was the highest, the most expensive commodity. Slaves were the largest, most lucrative commodity during the cotton boom. That wasn't always the case, though. You know what I mean? If you look into the Constitution, there was actually things put in the Constitution for the slave trade to end 25 years after its ratification, which it was ended as far as the trade goes. The international trade, it was ended in 1807. That's 25 years after 1788. So yeah, that really did happen. If you look into Thomas Jefferson, who wrote notes on the state of Virginia, one of the problems that he pointed out was a way to get rid of the black people. Slavery wasn't necessarily becoming a liability for Southern planters before the cotton boom, but it wasn't even remotely as lucrative as it was after the patenting of the cotton gin, which was 1792, and then the acquisition of the Louisiana Purchase and later the Mississippi and Alabama, or the Mississippi Territory, as you rightly pointed out, it was called. But it wasn't as lucrative, until this cotton boom. So this cotton boom actually fueled slavery, made it bigger. And oh shit, I gotta go clock out. Hey, give me like 15 minutes and I'll be right back.
Okay, that's fine. All right. All right. So yeah, if you guys was picking up on the brother, basically he was explaining that certain parts of the area that we know as the United States was lucrative and certain parts wasn't as lucrative. And as I was mentioning, again, the South wasn't ready to let go. They weren't ready to let go. If you got something that's building your economy up, right, and building the brand, building up your, building up your territory, why would you want to let that go? What else do you have to rely on? At that time, slavery was like a multi-million dollar business. In our modern time period, it would be like a multi-million dollar business. Why? Because people was making profit. People was profiting off of that. Like, they weren't ready to let that go. You can't let it go. But that's just how it was. And then that led to a point of the Civil War. And that led to the Civil War. And before the Civil War, it you had like I say, you had the Industrial Revolution coming to place. Right, but that led to the Civil War, which now, okay, you got the Reconstruction era. You have no choice but to rebuild. And Georgia, Atlanta, what today is now known as Atlanta, was the city that was burnt completely down. And there was other towns in places like Tennessee that was burnt, that was destroyed. But Atlanta happened to be completely destroyed due to that Civil War. It was completely demolished. And they had to rebuild it. All right, so but yeah, let me go back to the passage real fast, right? And let me go back to the passage real fast. So it says, under Varnum's leadership, legislation moved through the Congress and passed both houses on March the 2nd, 1807. The House and Senate agreed on a bill approved on March the 2nd, 1807, called an act to prohibit the importation of slavery into any port or place within jurisdiction of the United States from or and after the first day of January in the year of our Lord. So the measure also regulated the coastwise slave trade. Okay. President Thomas Jefferson signed the bill into law on March the 2nd of 1807. All right. So it says the role of the Navy was expanded to include patrols off the coast of Cuba and South America. The effective date of the act was January 1st, 1808, was celebrated by Peter Williams Jr. in oration on the abolition of the slave trade delivered in New York City. All right, so and then it goes down to say effectiveness and persecution for slaving. So it says, while there are no exact figures known, historians estimate that up to 50,000 slaves were illegally imported into the United States after 1808, mostly through Spanish Florida and Texas, before those states were admitted to the Union. However, South Carolina Governor Henry Middleton estimated in 1819 that 13,000 smuggled African slaves arrived every year. And then check this out, right? So Carl C. Cutler's classic book on American Clippers records the act outlawing the slave trade in 1808 furnished another source of demand for fast vessels, and for another half century, ships continued to be fitted out and financed in this trade by many a respectable citizen in the majority of the American ports. Newspapers of the 50s contained occasional references to the number of ships sailing from the various cities in this traffic. One accountant stated that as late as 1859, there were even 7 slavers regularly fitted out in New York, and many more in all the largest ports. And it says, in 1820, slave trading became a capital offense with an amendment to the 1819 Act to protect the commerce of the United States and punish the crime of piracy. A total of 74 cases of slaving were brought in the United States between 1837 and 1860, but few captains have been been convicted and those have received trifling sentences, which they had usually been able to avoid. Nathaniel Gordon, who was hanged in 1862, was the only person to be executed for illegal slave trading in the United States. Now, you had one person that was executed for illegal slave trade. Think about that for a moment. Oh, Lord. All right. So it says, in addition, after the 1808 abolition of the slave trade to the United States, many Americans continued to engage in the slave trade by transporting Africans to Cuba. From 1808 to 1860, almost one-third of all slave ships were either owned by American merchants or were built and outfitted in American ports. It is possible that U.S. citizens may have transported twice as many Africans to other countries such as Cuba and Brazil as they did to their own ports. So the U.S. Navy was slow to institute anti-slave patrol off the slave ports of Africa. It was not until 1820 legislation that authority was given to the president to use naval vessels for this task. Even then, enforcement activity was sporadic and largely ineffective. The U.S. position meant that many slave ships from other countries falsely flew the American flag to avoid being seized by British anti-slavery patrols. The first U.S. warship sent to the African coast to intercept U.S. vessels operating in the illegal trade was the USS Kane. A total of 5 U.S. Navy ships were on station there in 1820 and 1821, arresting 11 American slavers. No further U.S. anti-slavery patrols were carried out until 1842, and then with limited effectiveness due to political pressure from the slave-owning states. The Atlantic slave trade was not ended until the American Civil War, when American-built and managed ships were prevented from operating. You see that? See, this is a lot of stuff that we have not learned in school. Again, this is stuff that we don't know about slavery. As I said before, there's a lot to slavery that we don't know. There is a lot to slavery that we don't know. All right, so let's look at some books that you guys can look into, right? So one of the books is by W.E.B. Du Bois. All right, so this book is called The Suppression of African Slave Trade. The Suppression of African Slave Trade by W.E.B. Du Bois. Okay. That's the name of the book. Let's see. In this book, what can we find? And the editor is Henry Louis Gates, introduction by Saidia Hartman. And if you guys have not, when you get a chance to, you guys look at Dr. Henry Louis Gates and check out his documentaries. He does a great job at giving historical context about the African American history, and he goes into about African history as well. But he does a great job dealing with that. He has one called The Many Rivers to Cross, and then he also has the one about the Reconstruction era, and he just recently came out with one about the making of Black America. So you guys need to get a chance to look into that. Dr. Henry Louis Gate on PBS. Let's see. All right, so let me see what this comment say. Another good book is Du Bois' Doctor Dissertation. Let's see. Du Bois Dissertation. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's the book that I'm talking about. The Suppression of African Slave Trade. Yeah, that's the book that I'm talking about. That's the book that I'm currently going into right now. So in this book, it talks about the planting colonies, character of these colonies, restriction in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, general character of these restriction, right? And it talks about the rise of the English slave trade in his book. And it goes into the farming colonies, the Dutch slave trade, restriction in New York, restriction in Pennsylvania and Delaware, New Jersey, general character of these restrictions. All right, so let's look at the Federal Convention, which talks about which deals with the first proposition, the general debate, the special committee, and the bargain appeal to the convention. All right, so let's look under here where he talks about the general debate. So Du Bois was a great historian. He was a great historian. I say that for sure. Like he really, and I don't see why not many people give him the credit for his work. Because Du Bois did a lot of historical, he did a lot of historical research. He really did. He did a lot of historical research, and I don't see why he never really received credit on a lot of the things that he have done. I mean, he had got some things wrong, but check this out. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look into it. All right. So it says the first proposition: slavery occupied no proponent place in the convention called to remedy the glaring defects of the Confederation for the obvious reason that few of the delegates thought it expended to touch a delicate subject which, if let alone, bade fair to settle itself in a manner satisfactory to all. Right? Then go further down. It says the latter committee consists of Roulette, Randolph, Gorman, Ellsworth, and Wilson, reported a draft of the Constitution August 6 of 1787. The committee had in its deliberation probably made use of a draft of a national constitution made by Edmund Randolph. One clause of this provided that no state shall lay a duty on import, and also the first, no duty on export, and second said no prohibition on such inhabitants as the United States think proper to admit. The third one says no duties by way of such prohibition. It does not appear that any reference to Negroes was here intended. In the extant copy, however, notes in Edward Rutledge's handwriting changed the second clause to no prohibition on such inhabitants or people as the several states think proper to admit. In the report August 6, these clauses take the following form, which is Article 7, Section 4. No tax or duty shall be laid by the legislator on articles exported from any state, nor on the migration or importation of such persons as the several states shall think proper to admit, nor shall such migration or importation be prohibited. And he have studied well enough to even put this out there. Okay, put this kind of information. He did a lot of study into slavery. Now, remember, Du Bois was a professor at Clark University. All right. And his thing was sociology and history. He was a polymath. But let me go ahead and continue. Now, also in this book, it says the general debate. This, of course, referred both to immigrants and to slaves. That deals with migration and importation. Debate on this session began Tuesday, August 22nd, and lasted 2 days. Luther Martin of Maryland precipitated the discussion by a proposition to alter the session so as to allow a prohibition or a tax on the importation of slaves. The debate immediately, let me zoom this up a little bit, if I can. All right, so there we go. It says the debate immediately became general, being carried on principally by Rutledge and Pinnekes and Williamson from the Carolinas, Baldwin of Georgia, Mason and Madison and Randolph of Virginia, Wilson and Governor Morris of Pennsylvania, Dickinson of Delaware and Ellsworth, Sherman, Jerry King, Landon of New England. All right, and then he goes on to talk about what was said in that debate. So it says, in this debate, the moral arguments were prominent. Colonel George Mason of Virginia denounced the traffic in slaves as immoral. Luther Martin of Maryland regarded it as inconsistent with the principle of the Revolution and dishonorable to the American character. Every principle of honor and safety, declared John Dickinson of Delaware, demands the exclusion of slaves. Indeed, Mason solemnly averred that the crime of slavery might yet bring the judgment of God on the nation. On the other side, Rutledge of South Carolina bluntly declared that religion and humanity had nothing to do with the question, that it was a matter of interest alone. Jerry of Massachusetts wished merely to refrain from giving direct sanction to the trade, while others contented themselves with pointing out the inconsistency of condemning the slave trade and defending slavery. So check this out. It says difficulty of the whole argument from the moral standpoint lay in the fact that it was completely checkmate by the obstinate attitude of South Carolina and Georgia. Their delegates, Baldwin, the Pickaninnies, Rutledge, and others, asserted flatly not less than a half dozen times during the debate that these states can never receive the plan if it prohibits the slave trade. Again, they said what these states can never receive the plan if it prohibits the slave trade. That if the convention thought that these states would consent to a stoppage of the slave trade, the expectation is vain. By this stand, all arguments from the moral standpoint was virtually silent, for the convention evidently agreed with Roger Sherman of Connecticut that it was better to let the southern states import slaves than to part with those states. So as you can see, there was debates that was going on about this. So many people had mixed feelings about it. Some seen it as a political standpoint, some seen it from the economic standpoint, and some seen it from a moral and religious standpoint. And then there was some that said, let the South continue to import the slaves. All right. So this was discussed long before 1807. And 20 years later, 1807 came in. That's when the law came into place about the illegal importation of slaves. So this is what Du Bois outlined. All right. This is coming from his research. Okay. And I think we all need to pay attention to W.E.B. Du Bois more. We got to pay attention to him. We got to pay attention to his work. We got to. All right. Now, going down, it says, besides these arguments as to the right of the trade and the proper seat of authority over it, many arguments of general expediency were introduced. From an economic standpoint, for instance, General C.C. Pickney of South Carolina contended that the importation of slaves would be for the interest of the whole Union. The more slaves, the more produced. Rutledge of the same state declared if the northern states consult their interests, they will not oppose the increase of slaves, which will increase the commodities of which they will become the carriers. This segment found a more or less conscious echo in the words of Ellsworth of Connecticut. What enriches a part enriches the whole. It was moreover broadly hinted that the zeal of Maryland and Virginia against the trade had an economic rather than a humanitarian motive, since they had slaves enough and to spare and wished to sell them at a high price to South Carolina and Georgia, who needed more. In such case, restriction would unjustly discriminate against the latter states. The argument from history was barely touched upon. Only once was there an allusion to example of all the world in all ages to justify slavery. And once came the counter declaration that Greece and Rome were made unhappy by their slaves. On the other hand, the military weakness of slavery in the late war led to many arguments on that score. Luther, Martin, and George Mason dwelt on the danger of a servile class in war and insurrection, while Rutledge hotly replied that he would readily exempt the other states from the obligation to protect Southern against them. And Ellsworth thought that the very danger would become a motive to kind treatment. The desirability of keeping slavery out of the West was once mentioned as an argument against the trade. To this, all seemed tacitly to agree. Again, that's a deep book. That's a good book. Let me give you guys the title of the book again so y'all can look it up for yourselves if y'all want to read more into it. All right, so the title of the book again is called The Suppression of African Slave Trade. Okay, The Suppression of African Slave Trade. All right. So there's that book, and let me see what else. Let me see what else. And then I have another book. It's called After Abolition, Britain and the Slave Trade Since 1807 by Marika Sherwood. So let me show you guys the title of this book. That's the title. Okay. After Abolition, Britain and the Slave Trade Since 1807, Marika Sherwood. Kind of zoom that up a little bit. All right. So in that book, of course, it goes into what I was talking about, the subject in itself. Okay. So this one deals with the British and European Acts of Parliament and international treaties regarding slavery. Some slave traders on the West African coast and in Liverpool. All right, so let's go further down. All right, so right here, I'm gonna show you guys. Okay. So right here where it says the apex appendix, the first. So British and European Acts of Parliament and international treaties regarding slavery, right? Check this out. It says, why list these? To demonstrate just how meaningless signatures on official pieces of paper can be. European powers signed treaties after treaty, passed one act of parliament after another, issued one royal decree after another, but how many were actually put into practice? The chapters in this book have begun to illustrate just how meaningless they were to far too many Europeans. As Philip Curtin argues, various European powers made the maritime slave trade illegal for their subjects at various dates, scattered through the first half of the 19th century. But the date of illegality made less difference than the date of willingness or ability to enforce the prohibition. Various subterfuges were used to continue the trade in the fact, if not in theory. So what it says some international acts. Denmark abolished trading in slaves in 1792 to 1803. French revolutionary government prohibited slavery and the trade in 1794. So Napoleon reinstitutes the French slave trade and slavery in 1802. The Netherlands abolished trading in slavery in 1803. So the United States, no more slaves to be imported in 1804, right? Swedish abolished trading in slave in 1813. Oh, and I got looking at information about Sweden and their role in the slave trade. That's something I need to look into. But anyways, it says Netherlands declared slave trade originating in Dutch port illegal, 1814. Spain declares abolition of slave trading, 1814. Congress of Vienna, the declaration against the slave trade signed by the Austria, Britain, France, Portugal, Prussia, Russia, Spain, and Sweden, 1815. Now check this out, and it goes down even further. All right, it goes all the way down. It says Mexico abolished slavery in 1829. Right? All right, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but let's just look at some of it right up here where it says British acts and decrees. Listen to Lord Palmerston addressing the House of Lords on July the 26th of 1844, when innumerable acts had been passed and treaties had been signed by Britain with other European countries, all promising to see traded and enslaved Africans. Whoa. So for 120,000 to 150,000 slaves are landed annually in America. It is calculated that of these three Negroes seized in the interior Africa to be sent into slavery, but one reaches his destination. The two others died in the course of the operation of the slave trade. Whatever may be the number transported, therefore we must triple it to obtain the true number of human beings whom this detestable traffic kidnaps every year from Africa. And to Joseph Pease of the Anti-Slavery Society, who stated in 1895 that today there is probably more slavery for which we are to a larger extent responsible in our protectorates than we have at any time known in our colonies in the West Indies. All right. So it says the Lord Logger much involved in East Africa and created High Commissioner of Northern Nigeria in 1901, who had advocated the gradual abolition of the legal sanction of slavery and not compulsory emancipation. The development of East Africa must depend on Negro labor. Whoa. So then it goes on to say, and to Sir Henry Johnson, Vice Consul in the Niger Delta, 1885, Commissioner of South Central Africa, 1891 to 1896, of Uganda, 1899 to 1901, who believed that the African slave trade, white peoples are punishing the Negro for his lazy backwardness. The races that will not work persistently and doggedly are trampled. And on the continent of Africa, we have little but backward people to deal with. It said this list does not include all the acts of parliament, royal decrees, and ordinances passed by colonial governors. I have listed just enough to demonstrate that passing law was relatively easy. Enforcing them, as demonstrated in this book, was and is a different matter altogether. And she was right. See, it's one thing to pass a law, but to really enforce a law is a whole nother thing. You can have it written on a piece of paper, but just because it's written on a paper or documented does not mean that people are going to oblige by what is being said. Okay? People are not going to oblige by that. So let me see if the brother's going to come back on here. So, anyways, I was just trying to see if the gentleman wanted to come back on here to give some words before I close out. But anyways, yeah, the whole point I'm trying to say is that anything could be documented. But just because it's documented does not mean that people are always going to follow the rules or they're going to deal with corporate punishment. So a lot of these people that were involved in illegal slave trading, they were able to get away. They were able to bend the rules. So what I'm stating is that we are not only byproducts of those that was around doing legal slave trading, but also those who came here illegally. We are a product of those people. Those who came here illegally and those who could not be transported here got sent elsewhere. Okay? That's what we are byproduct of. And we must understand that it is very deep. Our history is so deep. It is so deep. It is so much to know. And it makes me mad when people play around with this because there's people who think for some reason that slavery wasn't real. And those are people that I lose respect for. I lose a lot of respect for those people because no matter how many times you give them information or you expose them to the facts, to the document, they still will fist their mouth up and say that slavery did not exist. What planet are you on? If you honestly believe that, what planet are you on? What type of drugs are you taking? If you really believe that shit with your heart and your soul, what type of drugs are you fucking taking? You gotta be on some shit. And a lot of them are brainwashed. And then they listen to certain individuals that's on these YouTube channels that don't know what the fuck they talking about. And they just saying stuff just so they can manipulate the minds of the people. And when I think about when Kanye West said slavery was a choice for whom? Was it a choice for the people that was enslaved? Or was it a choice for those who were slave traders? Or who wanted to buy slaves? Who are you speaking of when you say slavery was a choice? You can't say the people that was enslaved made a choice to be a slave. No, it wasn't that kind of choice. Their life was threatened. Their lives was put in danger. They was placed under pressure. They were placed under pressure. I mean, I don't see how people can get away with that. Those type of people, I'm gonna be real. Those type of people need their ass whooped. When you sit here and tell me that slavery did not exist because you don't know where the slave boat is at, that lets me know that you need your ass whooped. You need your ass beat the fuck down. Because all the information is being exposed out there, but you want to still be stupid enough and you trying to convince somebody who have ancestry as much as the shit that we've been through, what we had to deal with, what we had to endure, as much as our ancestors had to endure, you fish your mouth up and say some shit like this. It shows that you have no remorse. You have no respect. You don't understand. You don't get it. All right, so let me see if I have any commentaries. All right, so I have to go through my mobile device because for some reason I can't see the comments sometimes on the computer. Okay, so I guess I don't have any comments right now. But yeah, when you fish your mouth up and say some shit like that, man, you need your ass whooped. You need your ass beat the fuck down. And in my mind, that sound like a sellout. When somebody tell me that, oh, there was no such thing as slavery. Slavery was I seen something on Clubhouse. And this what pissed me off to the extreme. So I was on Clubhouse one day. And they had a topic that was slavery a lie. These supposed to be conscious ass motherfuckers, right? These niggas supposed to be conscious as hell, and they talking about is slavery a fucking lie. Like, are you fucking serious? Did you fucking come out your fucking mouth and say that is slavery a lie? Like, you can't be serious. You really cannot be serious at this point. You should not be debating about is slavery, whether or not slavery exists. Because if you was well studied and you was well functioned and you had got the right material, there wouldn't be no question whether slavery exists or not. There wouldn't be no fucking question behind it. It's like utterly disrespectful. This just go to show how many of our people, well, I wouldn't even say our people, how many people are gullible. Yeah. So what I'm doing is I'm waiting on the brother to come back to see if he want to give his commentary. Goodness gracious. All right. So I'm gonna see if he gonna come back and give some commentary on this. If not, then I'll just go ahead and close it out. All right, so just give me a moment. All right. Also, there's a book that I had checked out from the library, and this go into the chronological history of African Americans and Black people in achievement. Okay. So this book right here, and I'm covering it up for a reason. The name of this book is called Black First: 4,000 Groundbreaking and Pioneering Historical Events, third edition by Jesse Cartney Smith. So please get this book if you haven't. This is the chronological history and that African Americans have done in this country, and it goes into like different categories, different subject from the auto industry, the advertisement, to arts and music, also entertainment, theater, cinema, government, social activism, whatever you can think of. This book goes into all of that. So make sure you guys check this book out, okay? Black First: 4,000 Groundbreaking and Pioneering Historical Events. All right. So that's where I got the information about the acting prohibition of the importation of slaves. That's where I got the information from this book. All right. So waiting to see where his brother is at. Mhm. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, wait a second. Damn, I forgot all about it. I seen somebody else having problems.
All right, you guys, I have the brother on the phone.
Yo, I'm right here. Give me a second.
Okay.
How much you said?
Okay. Okay. It's all good.
Now I fuck around. I was getting ready and shit. I was on the bus and I was getting ready to come to you. I'm looking through my phone and shit. And didn't get off at my goddamn stop.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a good little walk.
Wow.
But it's all good. What's poppin'?
Okay.
Where were we rather? I mean, what you want to talk about?
Okay. So now I just wanted you to finish up what you were saying earlier before you had got off.
What was I saying about the Mississippi thing?
You were saying something about the Mississippi thing, and then you also was I think no, we were talking about Virginia and yeah, like the slave importation. You left off from there.
Oh yeah. In Virginia, the main importation spots were it was originally the York River. That was the main spot, and later it turned to the James River. And now, if you're familiar with the James River, that's where the myth, what's his name, the Willie Lynch thing, the Willie Lynch myth. That was on the James River.
Okay, but now people argue that the Willie Lynch letter wasn't real.
It's not real. I know the dude that wrote it. He's from Durham, North Carolina. I forget his name.
Actually, I have the book somewhere.
Yeah. I read that book before it was a book.
Mm-hmm.
My mother's first cousin, who I refer to as my aunt, rightfully, really. She was in, like part of my family that was into the black shit, and she brought me that book, the Willie Lynch letter, when it was stapled together before it was published. Oh, yeah, that's how she had it. I ain't go that far. I was young, but my mother read it first, and then I read it after her. My mother asked me, did I think it was real? And I told her no. She was like, why? I said, because of the language you used. And I was right. I didn't even know that it wasn't real. But my cousin actually know the dude that wrote it. That's why I said it. You know what I'm saying? My aunt, like, she knows the dude that wrote it. He's from Durham, North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not real. But I noticed it because back then, because of the way he spoke, the way he used words like black, he didn't use words like that. And then I think, all right, I'm in Highland Park, so it's a little, Highland Park, oh well, like any other city, any other black city. So give me a second. Yeah, the Willie Lynch thing is not true. I mean, it's not. And then as I continue to research, I look at things like Willie Lynch as a negative because what it does is it gives white people far too much agency and it relinquishes any agency that we have. While the effects of it, you know, the whole light skin, dark skin thing, you know, that indeed happened, but that wasn't the mechanism in which it happened. Also, one of the myths about slavery we believe is white people, I mean, light skinned people worked in the house. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. I've never seen any evidence of that. Ever. Never seen any evidence of that. Where that comes from is like after slavery, when white people will put ads in the paper looking for, you know, like a maid, and they would request light-skinned people, light-skinned women. That happened, but it's as far as slavery now, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. Whatsoever.
Wow.
None. But we run with it. You know, I remember I was in school. I was in the 5th grade. We were talking about slavery, and the teacher said, I mean, and one of the dudes, you know, when we were talking about slavery, when we got together, just, you know, children, one of the kids, lighter skinned kids, was like, well, at least I was in the house and I wasn't in the field like your black ass. Not talking to me, talking to another dude. Shit bothered me a little bit, so I went home and asked my mother. My mother told me, she said, go tell that nigga that, yeah, he probably had you in the house playing with your booty hole. And that was a good one. And I appreciate her telling me that because it made me challenge that notion. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, but that's not true. There's no proof of it. There's no evidence that indicates that was ever the case. It may have been the case on a few plantations, but nope, there was no norm.
There was no
norm. There was no light-skinned norm. And another thing, and this one's going to make people mad.
Okay.
Because we love this one.
Go ahead.
There were no slave farms. There were none. None. There were not one farm in the United States.
Now, why do you say there was no slave farms?
Because there were none. None.
So what evidence would you have to prove that there was no slave farms?
That there's no evidence that there was any slave farm. That's my evidence that there was. That's my evidence. Because there's no evidence to say there was. That's just something we run with. Just like the light skin thing. It's not true. There's no. If you ask somebody about a slave farm, they're going to bring up Armstead in Baltimore. They're going to bring up Shacklebottom in Richmond. Lumpkins Jail. None of those places were slave. I've been there. Each place. None of those places were slave farms.
Then what were they?
It's not even plausible to breed a human being and even being generous to say 50 years of the domestic trade. It's not plausible. And it didn't happen. I mean, there's no evidence of it. Let me say that. I'm not saying that individuals weren't bred. That's true. That did happen. That did. But never on a large scale, remotely large scale thing like a farm where children were born and raised to be sold. That's not true. It's just not true. There's no evidence of it. Let me say that. God, Jake, look at this. You see that? Look.
I can't. Oh, that's a bird.
Yeah, he got a squirrel.
Oh, wow. Wow, I can barely see that. Wow. So let me ask you this. Have you read any books about the dealing with the the act of prohibition of the importation of slaves? Have you read anything
Yeah.
related to it? What books have you read?
Yeah. A good book on it is Take Me Back to Virginia. I forget the author.
Take Me Back to Virginia. Let me look that up.
Another good one is Blasting Games, The Slave Community.
Okay.
It's a very good one.
Take Me Back to Virginia. That's the name of the book. Take Me Back
to... That's the name. And you're going to get the song when you Google it. It's always the song that comes up first. But it's there.
So it's a book.
Take Me Back to Old Virginia.
Take Me Back to Old Virginia. Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, it's the songs. That used to be our state anthem, to be honest. That's why I laugh when people tell me Virginia isn't the South. Where the fuck you live? Shit. I mean, this was the capital of the Confederacy. I was born across the street from the White House of the Confederacy. You want to tell me this isn't the South?
Okay, so you mean to tell me this book is called Carry Me Back to Old Virginia?
I think it's Carry Me Back. It's either Carry Me Back or Take Me Back.
Okay.
It's in Amazon.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, Carry Me Back to Old Virginia by Tom Robush.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a really good one.
Okay.
That's a really good one.
Take Me Back to Old Virginia. Okay.
The slave community, that's the two that come to mind right now.
Okay, and let me see.
The slave community. The guy name is Blasting Gang. His last name is Blasting.
And the other book is called Slave Community?
Yeah, the slave community.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can post it up. All right, I'm trying to zoom it up. All right, so the name of the book that the brother is talking about is called Carry Me Back to Old Virginia. Let's see. All right, so this is the book that he's talking about. Okay. Carry Me Back to Old Virginia by Tom Roish, whatever his name is. So yeah, that's the book that he's talking about over here. And then the other one, you said The Slave Community?
The Slave Community, yeah.
All right, The Slave Community. Let's look up The Slave Community.
It's another one I can't think of. If it comes up, if I remember it.
Okay, and this is by John Blasting Gang. Blasting Gang. Okay, John Blasting Gang. All right, let's see.
They're both pretty cheap too.
Okay, hold on.
And your library should have them. Well, maybe not out of state.
Okay.
That's one of the. It's definitely here.
So tell us a little bit about the slave community book as far as from what you can remember.
Oh, well, it just talked about like different norms and climes that developed amongst the slaves themselves. You know, like different things they did, the way they celebrated holidays, for instance. You know, every Christmas we're inundated with, why are you celebrating this and blah, 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 all that shit. You know what I'm saying? Because everyone wants to be a contrarian nowadays. But the reality is, our ancestors celebrated Christmas because it was a fucking day off. It was one of the few days they had off.
Yep.
You know, so they celebrated. And it was harvest time, which is what Thanksgiving is as well. But, you know, Thanksgiving didn't come into practice until after the Civil War. Thanksgiving was created by the Lincoln administration so the nation would focus its origins on the North instead of the South. So that was political. You know, because the Virginia colony is older than the Plymouth colony by, 13 years. Yeah. The Plymouth, there were two separate companies, the Virginia Company and the Plymouth Company. And the Virginia Company is, you know, landed in Jamestown in 1607. The Plymouth Company landed in Massachusetts in 1620. So a lot of times when we learn American history, you know, we're kind of learning it from a slanted northern perspective, in a sense. The same way we learn world history from a Western perspective. Like, for instance, we say that Rome fell in like 4 something AD, fell in the 5th century. While Rome actually fell in 1453. It fell when Constantinople fell to the Turks. There was no such thing as a Byzantine Empire. Those people never referred to themselves as that. They referred to themselves as Romans because they were Romans. According to them, they referred to their empire as the Roman Empire. But the West, teaching from a Western perspective, say Rome fell, I think, in like 473. I can't remember. I'm bad with numbers. But I know it was the 5th century. But, yeah, like I was saying, it was a harvest festival. So, these people, and they dreaded, that's true, they did dread the first of the year. But not really initially. Because the danger of being so far away, while it did exist the entire time of slavery, it was more of a problem or a threat after the cotton gin, after 1800, after what we were talking about earlier, the move from being sold downriver, so to speak, to be sold to the Gulf states. That's when it became an issue. Prior to that time, if you were sold, it was normally not that far. You know what I mean? You could still have some type of familial connection. Of course, no one took that into consideration. I'm not trying to say that slave owners were more philanthropic at that time, but just the truth. You had a smaller network of slave owners at that point. The shit boomed in 1820. And that's why I said when people say I've seen too many slave movies, I disagree. I don't think there are enough slave movies. But we don't have any idea about slavery.
You're right. We don't. You're right, because it's a lot more to it than what we've been taught. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot more to it. And slavery is a very deep, complex in history to deal with.
Yeah, and in my very humble opinion, it is the most pivotal moment in our recent history. You know what I'm saying? It's the biggest thing that happened in our recent history. It's nothing, it's not. It's one of the more formative, that's what I mean to say, formative things that occurred in our recent history. It shouldn't be ignored. But you can find niggas that could talk about Imhotep and all that shit until they blue in the face. You know what I mean? But when I say stuff like, if they say they from Mississippi, and I say, yeah, you got ancestors in Virginia, I done got cussed out. I ain't never heard nobody say I was from Virginia. Yeah, because teenagers were sold around there. Most of youngers. And it's the interesting dynamic about the slavery thing too. Is if you look at the slave narratives, and you see like people who were enslaved when they were children, you know what I mean? Like slavery ended when they were young. So they remember it, but they don't remember much of it. They were children. And what I've read in many of those is they always articulate the fact that the older people didn't talk about slavery that much. They wouldn't mention it much.
Why?
And I think they didn't want to damage their children. They didn't want to damage the children. I think it was that bad. That bad. They didn't want, when we think of slavery, we think of whips and chains. The whips and chains ain't nothing to be mad about no more. I can see it upsetting you, but it ain't the whips and chains. The bigger deal was the way that we were made to feel about ourselves and the way we took on another person's perspective about ourselves. You ever notice when you're talking to a group of black people, and you talk to a group of black people, when we refer to like women or men, we preface it. We say, because black women do X, Y, and Z. Why don't we just say women? Oh, I could have got on another bus. Why don't we just say women?
Well,
Why?
because it's
Whenever
due
we
to
talking about ourselves,
marginalization, social construct,
right?
and marginalization.
That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Even in our own conversation, we use that adjective when it's unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm talking to you about men, I'm talking about who the fuck up. What other men am I talking about?
Mm-hmm.
I would say if I'm not talking about our men, I would say Chinese men. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm talking about us, we're the norm. But again, because our perspectives are so aligned with theirs, we objectify ourselves as well.
Okay.
Without even knowing it. And I think that's a very good example. Because we do that.
Now, how do you feel when you hear people make statements and say things like slavery did not exist and there was no ships around to show proof of evidence and the historical landmarks is a lie?
Yeah, I absolutely hate that. I go against that every time I see it. I don't let it get no breath around me. None. That's the biggest bunch of bullshit ever. I mean, my grandmother, my mother's mother, is a Chickahominy Indian. She's dead now, but she's a Chickahominy Indian. Her family's still there. They're still Chickahominy Indians. You see what I'm saying? It's not like somebody told me she was Chickahominy. They are Chickahominy. Now, I'm kin to the goddamn chief of the Chickahominy. But my mother, whose father was black, you know, she was real big on me not calling myself no goddamn Indian. And I'm glad she did that shit. But she like, that shit don't make you no different from any other nigga. Don't ever forget that. And I'm glad she did that. I'm glad she did that. Because when I say my grandma was a Chickahominy, don't get it confused. That's the second tribe that contacted the English, you know, after the power tearing. They live in the same area on the James River. The second tribe that contacted the English. They were in touch with the English. They talk about the slave trade. They talk about it. They know it happened.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. They said, I gotta find this narrative. But it was actually, and this dude, he was a Pamunkey Indian, which is not far from me either. But he's a Pamunkey Indian. And he was saying how he was cool with black people during slavery. He's like, but once emancipation started and they tried to put us in the same boat with the niggas, he ain't like him no more. His exact, well, not his exact words, but his exact sentiment. He said, we used to feed them. When they came by, we played games with the kids. But, you know, after emancipation, when they started to be labeled as us, they ain't like our ass no more. We fucked it up for them. My grandmother was, you know, they talk about that William Plecker thing and all that. On my grandmother's birth certificate, it does say color. And on my grandfather's birth certificate, it says Negro. Yep. So, I mean, they're not lying, but what is misguided about what they say is, yes, there were classification changes. That's true. But none of those classifications changed blacks. You know what I'm saying? It changed Indians. It didn't change black people. It changed Indians. It didn't have nothing to do with changing that. Yeah. All right, I can talk now.
Okay.
That was a good little walk. So long. I didn't want to be.
Okay. Wow. I mean, that's a lot.
But no, if you ask me more, I can say more. I mean, because that's kind of how it works. Like, I don't know, you know exactly what you want to hear. That's
a lot of information. I mean, because wow, you tell me some things that I didn't know about. I didn't know about. Okay, so you know that's something that we should have a conversation about one day about you know the Native Americans and you know African slaves. Yeah. And then
I seen a picture. There's a picture in it's called a Valentine's Museum, one of the bigger museums in Richmond. And it's this lady, Indian lady, sitting up there. And I saw that picture. I'm like, I've seen that picture before. You know, because I know I've seen it before. That's my goddamn grandmother, and I see a lot of these Aboriginals claiming her, and it's wild. Yes. You know the Tasha Z? You ever heard of her?
No.
Tasha Z. She do a lot of her and Phoenix Moon. Like Phoenix Moon claims that she's a Chickahominy.
Oh wow.
I doubt it. My black ass wouldn't be accepted in the Chickahominy. I'm too dumb. Yeah, I'm talking about, you know, I mean, there was a time where I couldn't join the church down there, for instance. You know what I'm saying? Like now you can. But there was a time when you couldn't join the church. You couldn't join. And they actually separated the Indians from the black people in the schools in Charles City County, Virginia. You know what I'm saying? Like in Richmond, you see a light-skinned person, you kind of just assume they from there. You know, because they mixed like shit. And it's not just mixed with Indians. You know what I'm saying? Like, so any type of European ancestry I have is through, the majority of it is through them. Like, by far. Yes. Like, I can trace my ancestry in Virginia back to 1608 to a dude who was a member of the Virginia Company. Yes. Who had a wife, had a baby with somebody named Sookie. No, not Thomas Emerson had a baby with Sookie. That was in 1620 something. But I forget his name. I'm gonna look it up again. Okay. But 1608. He's a member of the Virginia Company, a white dude. You know what I'm saying? But we didn't have codified slavery at the time in Virginia either, amongst the English at all. See, that's when did the
codified slavery come into existence?
Around 1630 something. I mean, that's when you start seeing it. But it's like it was ratified, I think, like 1660. Around that before the 1700s, yeah, because England didn't have any laws on their books pertaining to slavery at all. You know, they didn't have any laws on their books pertaining to slavery. England was trying to be, at the time, they were trying to be more of a modernized state, as opposed to, say, Russia, where Russia still had serfs at that time. Russia still had serfs in the fucking 1900s, you know, for real. But yeah, but they were trying to distinguish themselves from the collapsing Eastern Europe. Because Eastern Europe began to kind of decline after Rome. You know, when Rome became Rome, when Rome fell in 1453 with the fall of Constantinople, with Muhammad, it was his name. They call him Muhammad the Great, the Turk, who conquered, you know, the Ottomans. They conquered Constantinople. The decline of Eastern Europe, because they no longer had access to the trade routes. Well, they had them, but they had to go through the Turks in order, you know, to get it, so it was taxed heavily. And actually, that's one of the things that prompted the Portuguese to sail around Africa, and eventually prompted the likes of Christopher Columbus to sail westward, looking for a way to get to the west. And all of that was to get around the Turks. Because the Turks, you know, the Turks had actually built the canal. Well, I ain't gonna go that far. I'm not gonna say that. But the Turks were charging to take your ship up at the Suez Canal and ferry it, move it over to drop it in the Red Sea. You know, that was your way. That's how you got to India. But so, you know, with the Corsair, well, I always Carousel. I think it's Carousel or Caravel. Caravel. I always say it wrong. But when the Portuguese implemented that technology on their ships, a different type of sail, they were able to sail further and faster. And so they eventually circumnavigated Africa to get to India. And the Western Europe grew and got rich because of the West, because of, you know, the New World and their trade routes to the Indies. Whereas Eastern Europe declined. Now, you know, not like it became less of a place, but it was more, you know, they didn't have that outward expansion like what happened in Western Europe. You know, before 1492, it wasn't much going on in Western Europe. And I'm not going to say they weren't civilized and all that bullshit. They didn't take baths. That's bullshit. Venice still existed. The Venetian ports still existed. They were growing filthy rich dealing with the Turks. And they were white. So, no. And they had baths. That's so much. We just run with shit too much. Because the problem is, what we do is, we juxtapose white supremacy. You know what I'm saying? We juxtapose white supremacy. And the juxtaposition of white supremacy is just as asinine as white supremacy itself. You can't just make you the good one and them the bad guy in the movie, because this ain't a fucking movie, and we don't have good and bad guys in real life. I mean, good and bad are subjective terms. You know what I mean? So I could look at the likes of Christopher Columbus and not like some things that happened because of his actions, but I can still admire the fact that this motherfucker sailed and landed in goddamn Hispaniola. And we like to say that he was lost. No, he landed exactly where his coordinates said he would. Pretty much. Almost exactly. He just was wrong about how big the Earth was.
Mm.
He was wrong about that. But he thought that the Earth was smaller than what they previously thought it was. And he thought, when I forget the name of the parallel, like I heard you reading about that earlier. We were talking about Mississippi. Mm-hmm. But he did pretty much chart it almost to perfection. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, the juxtaposition, it hurts us because we miss out on history. You know what I'm saying? Like, when we look at Alexander the Great, we'll say, you know, like that was some white imperialist thing. Well, Alexander had no idea of what we call whiteness now. None whatsoever. None whatsoever. Even the Caesars, even Julius Caesar, no idea. Mm-hmm. No idea. We talk about movies like we say, I remember everybody was talking so bad about the Woman King or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Talking about the Dahomey, where they enslaved people, and they did. And us, me and you, descend from people who got caught up with the Dahomey almost undoubtedly. You know what I'm saying? But also, me and you descend from the Fawn, who were the Dahomey. You see what I'm saying? And so we ain't in a position to point no goddamn finger.
Right,
and
we're descending of those who were slave traders and also that was enslaved.
Yeah, no question. But when we look at that, it's like, oh wow, you know, they had slaves. But when we talk about Julius Caesar in history, one of the biggest things he did when he crossed the Rubicon was he brought back 200,000 Gallic slaves. 200,000 at one time. That did numbers for the Roman economy. That did massive numbers for the Roman economy. The Western Europeans didn't have shitloads of gold or good trade items, you know, manufactured goods. And they didn't have a lot of raw goods in so far.
That's why they went to the places like Africa, because that's where a lot of natural resources was at.
Yeah, that's what eventually brought them. The Romans actually made an incursion down below the Sahara. That's where we get the word Negro from, because the Romans encountered people who lived in the Niger Basin, and they called those people Niger. That's where we get it from. There's no etymology in the Latin language with the word Negro. It's a later addition to the Latin language. When I was in high school, I took Latin, and I took Latin from the time of doing the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. This guy named Marcus Aurelius. He's one of the more famous Roman emperors, one of the more celebrated Roman emperors, Marcus Aurelius. And I learned Latin from his time frame, and there was no Negro. It was mortals for black. It was no Negro at all. No Negro. That shit came later. Shit came much later. So, but yeah, eventually. But I mean, they went to Africa, because Egypt was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Until Eastern European places like what we call Ukraine now were developed for that same type thing. But Egypt was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, no question. That's where they got their grains from Egypt. So, but it wasn't like they didn't do it because the Egyptians were black or were not black. Or that's a silly ass argument in my opinion. But they didn't do it for that reason. You know, it's not some like, you know, some motivation like let's go and take their land. They're black. No, I mean that it did develop into that, right. But it did develop into that after 1492. To be quite honest, well after 1492. Right. Well after 1492, they weren't dominating anything. Like when we talk about the slave trade, or we talk about, let's talk about like slaves in the New World. You know, they have the way they tell a story. The way it's kind of brought to us is like white people were here and they didn't want to do the work, so they started importing niggas. No. In 1619, it was like 700 people in the entire Jamestown colony. Less than 700. Less than 300, my bad. Less than 300. So that 20 people put a little boost on the population. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not like, you know, they was sitting here, to be quite honest, I do, and quite a few of us would descend from people who were here longer than most white Americans.
What you mean?
Our people were here before the majority of their people were. the majority of black people in this country that are, and I'm not a big proponent of the ADOS ideology. However, I love that name because it's right to the point. The majority of the American descendants of slaves came here. Majority of our ancestors would have came here like after 1730, 1750. That's when it really blew up. But yeah, that's the Richmond was founded in 1737. You have what's called, ramparts. Like you hear that when you sing the Star Spangled Banner or whatever. Ramparts are like rocks or different pieces of land that's in the river that would stop a ship from sailing close to the city. That's why they built Richmond where they built it. But when the trade grew up, because you had money in this area, in this central Virginia area, you had this old money, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, you know what I'm saying? All in this area, you had a lot of old money. And Virginia is still the largest producer of tobacco in the world, hands down. Yeah, if you got a pack of Black and Milds, look at the pack of Black and Milds and see where it comes from. Look at it. And you smoke Marlboro. Anybody smoke Marlboro? Look at the Marlboro. See what? Richmond, Virginia. Yep. So,
wow.
Yeah,
wow.
So, I mean, they grew rich off this, tobacco. And as they grew more rich, they imported more people. And as the James River region developed, which Jamestown is like a marsh. Jamestown is an afterthought, to be honest. Jamestown not really a real place. It's more just a tourist place. But Williamsburg is real. Williamsburg, was actually the original capital of Virginia. But it was too easily attacked. So that's why Richmond became in 1737.
Okay.
But at that time, that's when it started to grow.
So let me ask you one last question. Have you read the dissertation by W.E.B. Du Bois?
Of course.
About what is it called? I just had the name of the book. Goodness gracious. Let me put
that. Souls of Black Folk?
No. This book is called The Suppression of African Slave Trade.
Yes.
To the United States.
Yes. I read it.
Okay. So would you give that as a strong recommendation for people to read?
Yes.
Because
Du Bois
a lot of people,
is one of those people that I really wasn't a fan of when I was younger. I kind of looked at, I consider myself more of a Marcus Garvey fan, than a Du Bois fan. The same way I consider myself a more Malcolm X fan than a Martin Luther King fan. But as I've grown, as I've matured in my learning, I have a lot of respect and reverence for Du Bois. So much so that I like to say Du Bois instead of Du Bois. But yeah, I have a lot of reverence for him. And a lot. And Martin Luther King as well. Martin Luther King, straight soldier. Big up Atlanta. Y'all produced a good one. For real. Yeah. For real, man. He's a fucking soldier, man. For real, I hate how we play him. He's a fucking soldier. A soldier. Because ain't too many of us willing to put yourself out there like that.
Oh, no.
It's easy as shit to say what you wouldn't do, what you wouldn't take.
Right. So how would you feel when people say things like, okay, like what happened, the events that took place in slavery, and they say, well, if that was me, I wouldn't go through this, I wouldn't go through that, I wouldn't deal with this, I wouldn't tolerate that, this, and other.
Well, obviously, they descend from people who did.
Right.
Because we're here now. And see, the thing about success in life is living. That's the purpose of life, is to live. And
that's
the fact that we're here is a testimony to their strength.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? And to be quite honest, that's a very immature take when you say shit like that. I kind of know where your head at when you say shit like that, because you wouldn't exist. You wouldn't exist without this world that we live in.
Come on.
We are products of this world the same way our ancestors were products of the world in which they live. So how are you going to say what you wouldn't do? And then again, you don't fucking know.
Right.
Well, because your ass get locked up. You're going to do what the fuck you told.
Right.
You're going to do it. You're going to do it. You're going to do it for fear of punishment. You're going to do it.
Right.
And we don't understand it. And I think I think it's disrespectful when we say stuff like that. Because we have no idea. Many of us have no idea what people went through. And none of us can absolutely internalize the feelings that they had. And so we should respect that. You know, in my opinion, we should respect that. You know, I remember the first Black Panther movie. When a Killmonger character was like, bury me like my ancestors did, rather die than be slaves. That's some dumbass shit to me.
But you know what? And speaking of the Black Panther movie, right?
I ain't seen the new one.
No, I ain't seen the new one either. Okay. But when I understand the old one, it's like basically you dealing with the relationship between the Africans on the continent and what I like to use the term neo-African. I like to use the term neo-African. Yeah. And, you know, refer to us, you know, as, you know, the Africans in the diaspora. So, you know, so Killmonger represent the neo-African, right? And T'Challa represents the African on the continent. So you just dealing with the relationship of those people and how they see each other. So we see that there is not only a situation of the fact that they both have they both share a common descendant, but also we see the colonization going on as well.
Yeah. You know, and I think a lot of times when we try to compare ourselves to continental Africans, we're doing ourselves a disservice because we're comparing a pond to the ocean. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're comparing Black Americans are so small in comparison to what continental Africa is. You know, we could compare ourselves to Nigerians, we could compare ourselves to Gambians, but to compare ourselves to the entire continent is ridiculous.
No, you can't compare yourself to the entire continent. No, you really can't.
You know, and then we have to keep in mind that they too are affected. See, the thing about history, the way we're taught history is that it's something that happened. It's not taught in the sense of something that is happening. We're living in this time. We're living in this paradigm. I believe that the paradigm that we live in now started in 1492. That's how long we've been living in this paradigm. And this paradigm is where the idea of white supremacy developed. But I like to call it the delusion of the white standard. Not white supremacy. I call it the delusion of the white standard because it's a delusion that whiteness is the standard, and that's something that we believe, and we're not going to admit it. We're not going to admit it because we're going to say we don't because we don't believe, but we do. We do. We don't across the board like light-skinned Black women because we just happen to think they're cute. You know, we don't call light-colored eyes pretty eyes because we came up with that ourselves. You know, we're identifying with the standard that exists in America. And that standard is a delusion of a white standard.
Right.
And that's, I think, more so than like calling me a nigger. I think that just believing that I should think like you. It's kind of like, and I don't know if y'all deal with this, you know, but me being from Virginia, we have a little bit more interaction with them northern cats. You know what I'm saying? And
it's a lot of northerners come down here where I'm at.
Yeah, they're like, they're coming to Atlanta. You know, them New York niggas coming to Atlanta, you know, and I don't blame them. You know what I'm saying? But it's kind of like the attitude they have, like how they look at themselves like they the shit. Ain't no problem with that. But they look at it like you should believe it too. You see what I'm saying? Like, you should just agree that you talk country and sound stupid. That's how they look at it. And that's white folks. That's how white folks look at it. Straight up. That's it. That's exactly how it is. Not only should you acknowledge them, you know, for, you know, feeling the way they feel about themselves, but you should also feel that way about yourself. The way they look at you, you should feel that way about it. Like a cat was telling me how slow Richmond is. I was like, slow in comparison to what? Like to New York. I'm like, no shit, nigga. New York is the goddamn one of the biggest metropolitan areas in the world. You know, it's more people in Brooklyn. It's almost as many people in Brooklyn in the entire state of Virginia. So of course it's different. But I'm not going to sit down and think bad about my fucking hometown because you do. Fuck you.
Right.
I love this shit. This shit made me, and this shit made you to a lesser extent as well. You don't know. It's us. Big up Virginia. Big up to the South. Big up Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama.
Yeah, because, and then, you know, the South, that's why I love the South so much. And I think you and I both have a lot in common on this. That the South cares a lot on African tradition very well, like carry the African tradition. And well, a lot of us don't realize that, you know, we still carry on the tradition of those ancestors. You know, a lot of stuff that we do is like descendant of the African people. You know what I'm saying? They customs and the traditions.
A lot of shit we do, we don't recognize as African.
Right.
You know, we think we're just black.
But in the South, we carry those. In the South, we carried the African tradition so well. And then it's like when our people went to the North, like migrated during the Great Migration period, when they went to the North, when they went to like Chicago, Detroit, Ohio, New York, and all of that, they carried that with them. They brought all of that stuff with them. And even in the schools of the thoughts that we, you know, that a lot of people are into, like the Nation Islam, you know, what's his name? Elijah Muhammad from South Georgia. Yeah, and Noble Drew Ali from North Carolina, Virginia area. And what's his name? Clarence 13X Alive being from Virginia.
Clarence 13X is from Danville, Virginia. Danville, Virginia is the birthplace of the cigarette. Just to put it out there.
Oh, wow. But you see what I'm saying? But you get the point, though.
Yeah. Oh, I know. But see, it's like, it's an American phenomenon to try to disassociate yourself with black people on the bottom. You know, because black people are all on the bottom from the Western or American perspective. Mm-hmm. So one of the ways to disassociate yourself with black people, because black people live where? In the South. So one of the ways to dissociate yourself from that is to not associate with the blackness of the South. You're ashamed of it. They're stupid. Because if they had any sense, they would have came up here and lived in these rat-infested ghettos with us. And one of the things that's overspoken when they talk about the Great Migration, they talk about so many niggas leaving the South, when actually a lot of niggas just moved to cities in the South. That's why Atlanta is Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? Atlanta is a landlocked place. But it's a major hub. Atlanta grew rich. It became what it is because of the goddamn cotton trade. Because it was a hub coming from the Gulf states going to Virginia. And the bigger markets up north. Like right now, 85. That's in Atlanta, right? Mm-hmm. Highway 85. Guess where it started?
Where?
Petersburg, Virginia.
Wow. Didn't know that.
Yep. That's where it starts, in Petersburg, Virginia. Petersburg is a city roughly about 40, 50 miles from Richmond. Yeah. And it's a ghost town to a sense now. You know, it's one of the black, it is black, boy. That's where your whole, you ever heard people who claim to be Israelites and they'll talk about Israel town or whatever? Right. That's close to where that is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's close to where that is.
Wow.
Yeah, but you know, Atlanta existed. It exists now because it was a major hub. You know what I'm saying? It was a major hub. Go there, processing there, to Petersburg, to Richmond, and then Baltimore, and further points north from there. Mm-hmm. And that's the formation of this country. And that's why it's so important to learn American history. That's why it's so important to learn it. But we don't really look into it because we come from a society that celebrates individualism and celebrates individuals. You know what I'm saying? So when you look for individuals amongst the enslaved population, it's not going to be that many individuals. You know what I mean? But this land, this world, everything that we have right now is predicated on the past few hundred years. And there's no way we can ignore the contributions of the people who built it or it was built upon. Right. You know, there's no way that we should ignore that. There's no way that we should ignore that.
Right.
You know?
Right. True.
So yeah, you're right. That's one thing. You know, we've been knowing each other for a while. Now I thought about it. You know, for a couple of years.
Yeah. Yes. Well, let me go ahead and close this out real fast, and then I want to continue to build on with you. All right.
Oh
yeah. Yeah. Let me just close this out. Let me close this out real fast. All right, you guys. So, as you can hear, that was my brother over there. He was teaching. He was giving a lot of information. I mean, he's very insightful about American history, African American history, as you can see. So that's Brother Kudjoe. All right. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I've been on here for 2.5 hours. Wow. I intend to be on here for very long, but thank you guys for tuning in. So y'all be safe, be careful, and make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell, share the channel, etc. So until next time, peace and power elevation be to all of you. This your girl Tiffany. I'm logging out saying deuces. All right. Thank you.